The monastery stood still beneath the amber light of dawn, yet within its quiet halls, a storm brewed. Kalama's voice, sharp with frustration, shattered the morning chant. His chest rose and fell like a bellows, breath heavy with pride. Another monk had corrected him during recitation. A small thing, yet in Kalama's heart it burned like insult. Pots trembled on wooden shelves as his anger surged. Around him, monks withdrew, eyes cast to the floor. But from the far corridor, the Buddha approached in silence, each step soundless, like a leaf touching still water. He looked upon Kalama, not with judgment, but with a gaze vast as sky. The fire in Kalama's eyes met that ocean of calm, and for a moment, he could not breathe. "When a man burns," said the Buddha softly, "he is the first to feel the smoke," and the wind shifted. Birds stirred from the eaves. The monastery exhaled. Kalama sat alone beneath the great banyan tree outside the monastery walls. The chant of the morning faded into distance, replaced by the hush of wind moving through its hanging roots. His heart still burned, but the echo of the Buddha's words lingered, soft and unyielding. He felt the shame of his outburst like smoke clinging to the skin. Around him, the world carried on untouched. A bird drinking from a puddle, an ant dragging a petal, the slow dance of dust in light. "Why does peace feel so heavy?" he whispered. The question rose and vanished into the rustle of leaves. In the silence, he began to sense another sound beneath his anger, the rhythm of his own breath. It came steady now, though the fire inside had not died. Somewhere in that rhythm, a lesson waited, quiet as dawn before the sun. Soft footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, carrying neither judgment nor haste. Ananda appeared from the path, his eyes calm, his smile faint. He stood for a moment, saying nothing, simply sharing the silence with Kalama. "Brother," he said at last, "the Buddha's gaze is not a wound but a mirror. What we see within it is ourselves." Kalama's jaw tightened. "He saw my failure." Ananda shook his head gently. "He saw your fire. Even the sun begins with fire before it gives light." The words settled between them like leaves drifting on still water. Kalama exhaled, slow, reluctant. For the first time that morning, he felt the air cool against his skin. His hands unclenched. Somewhere far away, a bell sounded, its echo soft and endless. That evening, the Buddha called for Kalama. The courtyard shimmered under the final light of sunset. The old bell hung silent in the wind, yet its silence felt louder than sound. Kalama approached, his steps hesitant. The Buddha stood beside the stone well, gazing into the water. "Do you see the sky in it?" he asked. Kalama nodded. "And when you strike it with your hand, what happens?" Kalama lowered his eyes. "The image breaks." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then, understand this. Anger is the hand. Peace is the sky. Every strike is upon yourself." The last rays of the sun touched his robe, turning it to molten gold. "Worry at dawn," he said softly. "We walk." Kalama bowed, though he did not yet understand why. Night deepened. The monk slept, but Kalama's eyes remained open. The Buddha's words echoed through the corridors of his mind. Anger is the hand. Peace is the sky. He rose before dawn, robe wrapped tightly against the chill. Outside, mist clung to the earth like breath. The path ahead led into shadowed forest, the place where the Buddha waited. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, yet something within him moved lighter. He did not know what awaited him beyond the trees, only that it would not be another lesson to memorize, but something to face. When he reached the gate, he paused, inhaled deeply, and stepped into the unknown. The journey toward the medicine had begun. The first light of dawn stretched across the forest like slow-moving gold. The Buddha walked ahead, barefoot, silent, his robe brushing against wild grass wet with dew. Kalama followed a few paces behind, uncertain whether to speak. The forest breathed. Birds awakened, insects whispered under leaves, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. After a long while, the Buddha spoke without turning. When water reflects the sky, it does not enter the water. Yet still, it is seen. Kalama frowned slightly, puzzled. Do you mean that I should not feel? The Buddha smiled faintly. Feel, but do not become. The storm may pass through you, but you are not the storm. The words hung between them, soft as mist. The sound of their footsteps became a rhythm of teaching. Silence, question, silence again. Deeper into the forest, they came upon a clearing where a snake shed its skin. The old layer lay curled upon itself, fragile, ghost-like in the grass. Kalama stepped back instinctively. The Buddha knelt and regarded the pale coil. Even this creature knows, he said, that to grow one must let go of the old form. Kalama watched, unsure whether to answer. The Buddha looked at him. Your anger, too, is a skin. You believe it protects you, but it only hides your softness. Kalama's eyes followed the snake as it disappeared into shade. Its new skin gleaming like bronze. A thought flickered, to shed without tearing. But could he? He did not yet know that the shedding begins with stillness. As the sun climbed higher, heat gathered around them. Kalama's thoughts began to churn. Master, he said abruptly, what if the world does not deserve my calm? What of injustice, insult, cruelty? Should I smile at those? The Buddha stopped, turned slowly, and looked at him. Would you hand fire to a child because he was cold? Kalama fell silent. You mistake heat for strength, the Buddha continued. Anger is born when compassion forgets its purpose. The wind stirred, scattering dry leaves across their feet. The forest seemed to listen. Kalama clenched his fists, not in rebellion, but in the ache of understanding that was beginning to dawn. The pain of realizing how much within him still fought the truth. By midday, they reached a river. The Buddha sat on the bank and cupped his hands into the water, watching sunlight play upon its ripples. This is the mind, he said. Touch it gently, and it reflects the sky. Strike it, and it breaks into fragments. Kalama knelt beside him, gazing at the shifting surface. His own reflection fractured with each current. How do I stop it from breaking? He asked quietly. You do not stop the river, the Buddha replied. You simply learn to see without reaching. A leaf drifted past, its journey effortless. Kalama followed it with his eyes until it vanished downstream, feeling something loosen in his chest. Not release, but readiness. As afternoon faded, the two walked in silence once more. Kalama felt different, not lighter, but clearer, as though the weight within him had turned to glass. He could see through it, if only briefly. The Buddha stopped by a tall body tree and turned. When you see the flame of anger arise, do not fear it. Simply know it. Kalama nodded slowly. To know it is to end it. The Buddha smiled faintly. To know it is to end your war with it. The forest wind lifted their robes, carrying the scent of wild jasmine. For the first time since his outburst, Kalama felt something close to stillness, fragile, but real. They entered a small village at the forest's edge, where farmers tilled the dry earth and children chased one another through clouds of dust. The air smelled of clay, smoke, and light. As they walked, an old man shouted from his field, his voice sharp with anger. Monk, keep your begging bowls away. You eat while we break our backs. Kalama stiffened. The insult pierced deeper than it should have. He turned, words rising like thunder on his tongue. But the Buddha simply kept walking, eyes serene, face untroubled. Master, Kalama whispered, trembling. You heard him. The Buddha nodded. Yes. Then why say nothing? The Buddha's answer was soft, because his words belonged to him, not to me. The simplicity struck harder than rebuke. Kalama's anger flared and faltered. He had never met a silence more powerful than his own voice. The Buddha stopped near a well, resting his bowl on the ground. Kalama stood beside him, still burning. You let him insult you, he said. You let him insult me. The Buddha looked at the water's surface and replied, If a man offers you a gift and you refuse it, who keeps the gift? Kalama's voice faltered. He does, so too with anger. The Buddha said, If you do not accept it, it remains with the giver. The lesson settled into Kalama like water soaking through stone. His breath slowed, though his heart still pounded. He looked back toward the field. The old man was already gone. His anger dissolved into dust. For the first time, Kalama understood. No one had truly insulted him except himself. They rested under a neem tree near the village edge. Kalama's heart still wrestled with pride. But master, he said, what if I had spoken? What if I had defended truth? The Buddha smiled. Would truth weaken if you left it unguarded? Kalama fell silent. You mistake defense for understanding. The Buddha continued. When truth is seen, it stands by itself. The leaves rustled softly above them, scattering light across the ground. Kalama felt the weight of his robe, the rhythm of his breath, the warmth of the earth beneath his hands. Everything simple, everything enough. In that stillness, something began to melt. Not his strength, but his need to prove it. As they prepared to leave, Kalama turned once more toward the fields. The same old man approached, this time slower, curiosity softening his face. Monk, he said hesitantly, you did not answer me before. Why? The Buddha met his gaze and smiled. When a man throws dust into the wind, it returns to him. Why should I catch it? The old man lowered his head, speechless. Kalama felt something shift inside, a quiet astonishment. The Buddha's peace was not weakness, it was power without harm. For the first time, Kalama saw that mastery of self is the only true strength. The farmer bowed deeply, his pride dissolving into gratitude. The Buddha simply nodded and continued walking. As evening descended, they sat upon a ridge overlooking the village. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the pink horizon. Kalama's eyes followed the shapes, remembering his own anger. How easily it had risen, how quickly it had vanished in the Buddha's calm. Master, he said softly, is it truly possible to never be angry again? The Buddha's gaze drifted toward the horizon. When you hold fire wisely, it gives warmth. When you hold it foolishly, it burns. Kalama nodded slowly, the lesson settling into his chest. The world below continued in its rhythm. Laughter, laughter, lifer. Life, but in Kalama's heart, something finally grew still enough to listen. The following morning, the Buddha and Kalama walked through a small village where the scent of rice and jasmine drifted on the wind. The path was narrow, lined with clay houses and sleeping dogs. A child ran suddenly from a doorway, tripped, and the bowl he carried tumbled forward, scattering cooked rice across Kalama's robe. The splash startled him. Anger leapt up like a reflex. His hands rose halfway before he caught himself. The Buddha paused, watching quietly. The child froze, eyes wide, trembling with fear. Kalama's breath shuddered. He remembered the farmer, the well, the lesson of reflection. And slowly, he lowered his hands. The rice clung to his robe like pale blossoms. He looked at the child and, for the first time, saw not insult, only fear. The Buddha's voice broke the silence softly. Look, Kalama, not at the robe, at his eyes. Kalama turned. The child's lashes trembled. His breath came quick with guilt. Beneath the fear, Kalama saw something fragile, the same helplessness that had once lived in him. The Buddha continued. This is what anger hides from you, the suffering of another. The words sank like rain into dry soil. Kalama knelt, brushing the rice from his robe. "It's nothing," he said quietly, offering the child a gentle smile. The child's small shoulders relaxed. He reached for the broken bowl, but Kalama stopped him, shaking his head. "Let it be," he murmured. "It has already taught what it came to teach." As they walked on, Kalama felt something new. A warmth that did not burn, a strength that did not demand. "Master," he said softly, "was this the lesson?" The Buddha smiled. "It is the beginning. When you see clearly, the heart begins to heal itself." Kalama touched his robe where the rice had fallen, a faint smile touching his lips. "I thought anger was my enemy," he said. "It was your teacher," replied the Buddha. "Without it, you would never have sought peace." The path wound through fields of white lotus and flowing wind. In their silence, understanding bloomed, not as thought, but as being. They rested beside a tree where blossoms fell like slow rain. The Buddha turned to Kalama and said, "This is the medicine of anger, to see suffering where you once saw offense." Kalama watched a blossom land in his open palm, its fragility striking him. "So it is not to destroy anger, but to understand it?" The Buddha nodded. "Anger ends itself when seen fully. What remains is clarity, the warmth of wisdom without its flame." Kalama closed his fingers around the petal, feeling its softness vanish against his skin. For the first time, the fire within him did not demand to be fed. It simply burned quietly, like a lamp guiding him inward. Night fell slowly. The two monks sat in silence until the stars appeared between branches. The Buddha spoke at last. "You have begun to taste freedom, not from the world, but from yourself." Kalama's heart felt strangely light. The cricket's song seemed softer. The wind moved without resistance. He whispered, "And if anger returns?" The Buddha smiled in the dark. "Welcome it as an old friend. Listen, it will remind you of the place where peace was born." The moon rose above them, full and gentle. Kalama bowed deeply, forehead touching the earth. No vow was spoken, yet something within him had already chosen the path beyond fire. The Buddha guided Kalama to a mountainside cave above the valley, where the wind carried whispers of chanting from distant monasteries. "Stay here," he said softly. "Listen to what remains when all words fade." Kalama bowed deeply. As the Buddha departed, silence swelled in his absence, vast, alive, unending. Inside the cave, the air was cool and dry. Kalama sat upon the earth, closing his eyes. At first, the mind roared with noise. Old arguments, faces, regrets, the sting of humiliation. Each memory flickered like flame. But the longer he sat, the less those fires burned. They became embers, then smoke, then only breath. He realized he had never truly listened before. Not to others, not to himself, not even to silence. As night fell, Kalama's mind began to wander. Shadows from the flickering oil lamp danced upon the cave walls, shaping faces from memory. The angry monk, the shouting farmer, the frightened child. Each appeared accusing and vivid. His chest tightened. He saw himself striking back, shouting, regretting. His breath grew shallow. But then he remembered the Buddha's words. Observe, don't absorb. He inhaled slowly. The images trembled, lost shape, and dissolved like mist in sunlight. In that moment he understood. Anger was never destroyed by will, only by awareness. The flame dimmed, not from suppression, but from seeing clearly. Hours passed unnoticed. Kalama's body ached, yet he did not move. Thoughts rose like sparks from a dying fire. Anger, pride, sorrow. but each met the cool gaze of awareness and vanished. Slowly, his breath deepened. There was no past, no self, no one to be angry for. The cave seemed to breathe with him. He felt the pulse of the earth, the heartbeat beneath stone. Then, for the first time, he did not resist his anger. He welcomed it. It arrived quietly, a small warmth in the chest, no longer an enemy but a teacher bowing in humility. Within that gentle heat, he felt peace. By dawn, the first birds began to sing. Kalama's breath moved in rhythm with their song. He opened his eyes, and the world was utterly still. The fire that once consumed him now burned clear, a flame that warmed rather than wounded. He understood then that anger had not left him. It had transformed. Like iron refined by heat, his heart had softened into strength. He whispered a silent vow. To speak only when words carried peace, to act only when actions healed. The cave was no longer a place of solitude, but of birth. The silent flame within him would light every path ahead. When the Buddha returned days later, Kalama rose to greet him. The master looked upon his student and said nothing at first. The silence between them was full, not empty. The Buddha's eyes glimmered with approval. "You have met your fire," he said finally. Kalama bowed. "And it did not burn me," he whispered. The Buddha smiled faintly. "Then it has become your light." Together they stood at the cave's mouth, watching the valley bloom in morning brightness. Kalama felt no pride, only gratitude. The flame within him no longer reached outward. It illuminated everything it touched, quietly, endlessly. The morning sun stretched across the valley as Kalama descended from the cave. The air was fragrant with wet grass and distant rain. Below, the village shimmered like a dream reborn. He walked barefoot through the fields, where he had once quarreled with the old farmer. The same sounds filled the air, the bleating of goats, the creak of wooden carts, the laughter of children. Yet everything felt different, softer. A boy offered him water from a clay pot, and Kalama accepted it with gratitude, bowing slightly. For the first time, he noticed how the simple act of receiving was also a form of giving. The world had not changed, only his seeing had. His steps were slow, his presence quiet. Every movement whispered of peace. As he entered the heart of the village, familiar faces turned toward him. Curious, respectful, some still doubtful. Among them, the old farmer stood once again, leaning against his plow. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the monk he had once mocked. Kalama approached and bowed. "How fares your field, elder?" he asked gently. The farmer hesitated, wary of hidden reproach, but Kalama's voice carried no edge, only warmth. "The rains have been kind," the old man muttered. Kalama smiled. "They your harvest feed many." The farmer stared, words caught in his throat. The monk he had insulted had returned not with pride, but with kindness. In that silence, understanding passed, wordless, complete. The farmer approached hesitantly, his voice low. "Monk, I spoke to you in anger before. You said nothing then, and I see now that silence was the greater teaching." Kalama smiled. "Silence has many voices," he said. "Sometimes it is forgiveness speaking softly." The old man's eyes filled with tears he did not expect. "Can peace truly be learned?" he asked. Kalama looked toward the mountains where his cave lay hidden. "Peace is not learned," he said. "It is remembered." The farmer bowed deeply, his rough hands trembling. The sound of wind through the grain became the only sound. A hymn without words, sung by the heart's awakening. From a shaded hill nearby, the Buddha watched quietly. His gaze followed the two figures standing in the field. One who had once shouted, one who had once burned. Now, both stood in silence, healed by understanding. Ananda approached from behind, hands folded. "Master," he said, The fire in Kalama has cooled. The Buddha nodded. No, he said softly. It burns still, but as light. Below them, the wind carried the faint laughter of villagers. The Buddha's eyes glimmered with gentle satisfaction. The teaching had taken root, not through words, but through the simple grace of being. In the quiet wind, he heard the Dharma itself breathing. As evening approached, Kalama returned to the monastery. The familiar chime of bells greeted him like an old friend. Monks bowed as he entered, sensing the change that needed no words. The Buddha awaited him near the altar. Kalama knelt, placing his palms together. "Master," he said softly, "the world did not change, but I did." The Buddha smiled. "Then the world has changed enough." The lamps flickered, casting soft halos on the walls. Kalama closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The air, once heavy with pride and fury, now carried only peace. Outside, the first stars began to bloom. Reflections of the same quiet light that now lived within him. Days passed into weeks, and peace settled upon the monastery like morning mist. Kalama spent his hours in silent service, sweeping courtyards, tending lamps, guiding younger monks through their first meditations. One evening, as the crimson sun sank behind the hills, the Buddha called him to the terrace. "You have found peace in solitude and in the world," he said. "Now find it in teaching." Kalama bowed. "But, Master," he said softly, "I am still learning." The Buddha smiled. "Then you will teach truly. For the one who believes he has finished cannot begin." A wind stirred the hanging bells. Their chime carried across the valley, a song of endings and beginnings intertwined. The next day, Kalama spoke to a small gathering of novices beneath the bodhi trees. His voice was steady, unhurried, neither preaching nor commanding, only sharing what he had lived. "Anger," he said, "is a mirror. When you see your reflection in it, bow, for it is showing you where to heal." The young monks listened in stillness, eyes reflecting both curiosity and awe. A gentle wind moved through the leaves, scattering light across their faces. "Do not fear your fire," Kalama continued. "Let it burn until it becomes clarity." As he spoke, his heart remained silent and still, untouched by pride. Teaching, he realized, was not speaking. It was listening through the hearts of others. Ananda recorded the teaching that evening, sitting near the altar as lamps flickered in the dim hall. Kalama's words, simple and clear, became verses, not of conquest or miracles, but of understanding. The Buddha read them later and nodded. "This," he said softly, "is not a teaching about anger. It is a teaching about love that forgot itself." Kalama bowed, his heart overflowing with humility. "Then love has remembered," he whispered. The Buddha looked out toward the horizon where the night began. "Yes," he said, "and through remembrance, the world will heal." The hall fell silent, save for the soft hum of oil flames, the sound of wisdom taking root. Night deepened across the monastery grounds. Fireflies drifted like slow stars between the trees. The Buddha walked among the monks gathered for evening meditation. Kalama sat quietly among them, breath steady, heart clear. The Buddha looked over his disciples, some young, some old, all bound by the same silence, and said softly, "The wind does not choose where to blow, yet everything it touches moves. Be like the wind." Kalama opened his eyes, feeling the cool air brush his face. There was no separation between himself, the world, and the quiet movement of that unseen breath. Everything, anger, peace, life, death, flowed together as one. When dawn returned, the first rays of sunlight fell upon the monks still seated in meditation. Kalama opened his eyes. The world was the same. Birds sang, leaves whispered, life unfolded. Yet his seeing was new. Within him, no trace of fire remained, only warmth. He rose, bowed to the Buddha, and stepped into the light. The morning breeze caressed his face like an old friend. He smiled, knowing anger would come again, but now it would find no enemy here. It would enter as wind enters bamboo, passing through and leaving music behind. The Buddha watched silently, the faintest smile touching his lips. The lesson was complete, yet infinite.